Support for Digging Deeper comes from
the Penn State Alumni Association, keeping alumni connected to the university and to each other. Membership information at alumni.psu.edu/belong.
and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrew Destin. With winter finally behind us and the weather warming, people are looking for outdoor activities. The Pollinator and Bird Garden at the Penn State Arboretum offers guests a chance to experience natural beauty and science in one immersive environment. On this episode of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron talks to Sherry Edelson, Director of Operations at the Arboretum, and Dr. Harlan Patch, Assistant Professor of Entomology and Director of Pollinator Research at the Arboretum.
So, welcome. I'm really looking forward to this show. I had the pleasure many years ago of standing on an open field on a cold, cold day when the Hostler oak was planted as sort of a sentinel to the development of an arboretum. And I must admit, I turned to my wife and I said, that is going to be the loneliest tree for a very long time. I just was having trouble imagining what was going to come in that space. And of course, I come back and be president, and here is this absolutely wonderful arboretum that I constantly visit. And, just a marvel and asset to the community. And now we have a pollinator and bird garden. So what is a pollinator and bird garden?
Well, so in our case, the Pollinator and Bird Garden is a 3-acre expansion to our botanic gardens that we worked on in very close partnership with Penn State Center for Pollinator Research and the Arboretum's Avian Education Advisory Committee and the folks at Shavers Creek Environmental Center. So the themes of the garden really focus on plant biodiversity and how those plants are really foundational for supporting insects and birds in our region.
So maybe it's worth defining what counts as a pollinator, and are birds pollinators? Is it just the insects? Is it just the bees?
In our part of the world, most of the pollinators are insects.
Yep.
We have a single bird pollinator, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird, which of course migrates up from the far south, even South America, every year to our part of the state. But a pollinator is an insect, an animal that transmit pollen from one flower to another, the male gamete to female structures, and it reproduces essentially the plant.
So when did this space open?
We opened the new garden in late June of 2021. Although I have to say that a lot of people had an opportunity to visit the space before we even opened, because we engaged volunteers in helping us to plant all the plants in the garden. And then we had several researchers whose fieldwork actually had to start before the construction fence came down. So a lot of people were in there before the general public got to come.
You know, I kept watching and the mounds of dirt and all these different things happening and little bits of designs. I am fascinated by the notion that so many people volunteered. And so give us a sense of the magnitude of the volunteers and what did they do?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're really blessed with at the Arboretum is the depth and intensity of community support that we have. Even despite the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic, we were actually able to welcome about 620 different people out onto what was then the job site to help us to plant the gardens. And those folks were Penn State students, They were community members. They were members of research labs on campus who were planning on conducting their field work out in the gardens after it opened. They were master gardeners from all across Pennsylvania. There were bird enthusiasts who had participated in bird walks out in our natural areas. So we were really grateful to be able to engage all those folks in building this incredible new space.
Did you know it was going to happen like that?
We had our doubts. It was the middle of the depths of the pandemic, and we were really grateful to get the support and permissions from the university administration as well as the general contractor, LS Fiore, to allow us to bring all these folks on site with appropriate PPE, including hard hats, masks, work gloves, and safety glasses. So everyone was really, dressed up for duty.
I might have heard in the opening you mention the number of plants that volunteers planted. I hesitate to say it in case I'm wrong. Do you know the number?
Yeah, I do. I'm so glad you asked. So there are over 140,000 individual plants in the new garden, and volunteers planted 110,000 of those with us.
That is just unbelievable. And why didn't they do the rest of them? Was that because it was part of research or something else?
Well, some of those plants were big, and so for the big trees and shrubs, we did contract out that work, and then some of the plants had to be installed during the off season, and so our team of staff horticulturists installed those.
So one of the things that I'm hearing as a piece of this throughout, advisory groups that are related to the bird populations and then researchers that are part of Penn State's pollinator group or master gardeners, I keep hearing this sense of the professional or the research side of this. How much of the gardens are really focused on a research element, not just people wandering around thinking that they're beautiful or interesting?
The garden itself is actually built from science up. So we chose the plant list in terms of, for the insects, I can say, certainly, and for the birds as well, to attract pollinators that live in central Pennsylvania, all the species. So we did our homework. We figured out what were the most attractive plants, what plants support them for their nutrition, things like nectar and pollen, and we put those in the garden. The reason there are so many plants is because we wanted to support such a great variety of biodiversity. So that's why there's so many plants. And I don't know of any other bird and pollinator garden in the world that is built from so much science. And we're also going to do a lot of research in the garden, which we're doing now, but it was literally built up from the science.
And so what kind of research, I think the fact that it was built on the science just, it makes me feel not just the volunteers, but the degree of expertise. It gives you a feeling that this is really something special. But what kind of research projects would people do?
So at the garden, I was just talking previously with Sherry, there's a number of projects that are happening this year, but this past year, we worked on a project to look at just who inhabits the garden right now. So we're trying to understand over time if our goal of supporting all these different pollinators is true. Do we really do the right thing? So we're mapping the pollinators who live there. We're trying to find what they're doing. And we've also, one of the projects we had also was to put out an automated insect monitoring system that we developed here at Penn State, working with engineers that will use AI to determine what insects are actually in the landscape. So those are just two projects we've been working on, but there are numerous others that are.
Does that mean
in the future.
you're catching them? Are you catching?
Well, actually, we don't catch them and kill them. So that would be the traditional old school method.
No.
We don't kill them, but they fly into a trap. They go through an apparatus that you can that can see. It has multiple cameras, can see the insect, and then it uses AI to try to identify who it is, and then the insect can crawl out the other side.
Amazing. And a visitor can see all of this.
Oh yes, you can see this. In fact, that particular project, which is called Insect Eye, a lot of people asked a lot of questions and were quite engaged with it.
And invented here at Penn State, huh? Go ahead, Sherry.
I was going to say that in addition to faculty and student research in the gardens, there is also ongoing community science underway. So an example of that is folks in our avian ed community and bird enthusiasts have been using the eBird app to note the occurrence of different bird species visiting the Pollinator and Bird Garden. And anyone can download that app and add their own observations. So to date, community scientists have noted 54 different bird species visiting the gardens.
Wonderful. So my wife and I could sit where the little fountain is in the sort of lean-to and look at the feeders and contribute to the app if we wanted to?
Yes, absolutely. It's a free app. It's produced by Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, and it's really easy and fun to use.
Oh, that just is amazing. The other thing that I'm really struck by are the types of things that are in there. I mean, you're thinking about being part of an arboretum, but here are 2 dead trees that are put in the landscape, and here are what look like the ends of logs ends of sticks at different sizes that makes for a bee hotel kind of thing. What kind of variety is there? Because we talked about over 100,000 plants, but in fact, between water features and this is a very deliberate strategy to give them homes and et cetera, right?
Yeah, I think, on the most basic level, I think that one of the things we're trying to do is to broaden people's perspectives. When we visit designed landscape spaces like gardens, often we think about those spaces from the perspective of our own aesthetic preferences. And what we're trying to do is encourage people to think about designed landscapes in terms of the value that they can provide for wildlife and the value that even features like dead trees or standing brush can provide to really support organisms at different points in their life cycles, and how really substantive our own contributions to species conservation can be just in our own home landscapes by, may leave a dead tree or leave your perennials up over the winter, changing our landscape management practices to really allow space for other organisms to thrive.
So not to be kind of strange, the dead trees are beautiful to you in that space.
Yes, the dead trees tell so many stories. I now sound like the crazy garden lady that you think I am. But I was, when we were building the garden, we had just installed those 2 dead Table Mountain pines, and one of the contractors on site, he was a mason, asked me what they were for, and I said, well, a lot of times these standing dead trees get called snags, and they're really important for predatory birds like hawks to use as vantage points for hunting. And as I was describing that, a Cooper's hawk actually flew into one of those trees and perched in it. And so it was a live, real-time demonstration of
magic.
Yes.
Magic. How important is it that this is science and nature and beauty all wrapped into one space? It's visually very appealing and at the same time built from science up. I could imagine we could have a successful a successful space without the integration of all those factors. And how deliberate was this in the thinking of the people who have really had this project go forward?
It was, as you're implying, it was very integral. And it's been such a pleasure to work with this team. It was very intentional to design a garden that was good for biodiversity. And as you're pointing out, some of those things can be quite surprising in gardens, like dead trees or insect hotels. But we also knew that it had to be appealing to people because we hope they will adopt some of these practices in their own gardens. And so, although a lot of the pollinator plants, say, are not very charismatic to humans, in fact, they have little small flowers sometimes, and people would look at them and say, that's not a great garden plant. The design itself integrates very appealing plants to human eyes, as well as things that are great, say, for pollinators. Not just very wild gardens. When people think of, say, pollinator gardens, they're usually very wild and rough. But this garden also has a much more manicured side to it, of course. It has a vegetable garden like you'd have in your own backyard, a small orchard. Those kind of things that people, we hope, can see in their own yards and their own gardens. See plants they want to plant, all that kind of thing.
So that's one. Do those bee hotels work? How do we know they work?
We're working on that now. So we know they work because we had a lot of nesting bees last year. We were very pleased. When the site was built, all of the soil was basically removed to build all those things and then put back. 70% of our bees, our native bees, live in the soil. And there were a fair number that lived there before, we knew. But I really wondered if they'd come back. And then there's a whole group of bees, about 25% of our bees, that live in tubes and wood and things like that. But I wondered if they'd come back after so much destruction. And lo and behold, they did. Nicely, I think the landscape around the Arboretum supports quite a number. But we'll see this spring who emerges from the tubes, because they'll be coming out very shortly.
Oh, good.
One of the most exciting things about the research that's underway in the gardens is that it is going to reveal to us how, as the landscape matures over time, we're actually able to achieve, hopefully, greater and greater biodiversity. So some insects, may have been making their homes adjacent to the garden, and, it was perhaps quite easy for them to discover this new resource. But for other insects, such as butterflies, it may take them a couple of generations to really fully exploit the resources that we're providing for them. So we at the Arboretum are really interested to see the increase in the number of insect and bird species that we record in the garden as the years go on.
Yeah, because those plants will evolve, won't they? The landscape is going to change and change. Well, so, I'm curious, you have cameras maybe to keep track of the birds and an insect eye to figure out who's in there. Are we doing anything to assess what the humans are doing in there? Or I'm trying to be funny. Molly tells me I'm never very funny, but I'm really curious whether you're having a sense of what the public perception is of the pollinator garden.
Yeah, I think one of the ways we're developing a sense of people's impressions is through all of the educational and experiential programming that we've been starting to host in the gardens in partnership with the Center for Pollinator Research and many other folks on campus. So over the first summer that the garden was open last summer, we actually had several hundred people attend educational and experiential classes and programs in the space.
Amazing. So I think a lot of people thought about this as a sort of save the pollinators, save the bees type of effort because of all this discussion about the collapse of hives. Is that a part of what we're doing as well, is helping ensure the success of future pollinators?
The answer to that is yes and no. This garden itself, of course, is relatively small given the size of the world and the need, say, pollination in agriculture and challenges of sort of urbanization. So this garden is itself not supposed to save all the pollinators, but it is a place we educate people. We take the research we do here at Penn State, we translate it, we create educational programmings for the garden and for the larger world. Show people how to garden, how to grow these plants. Hopefully get the green growers, the ornamental industry that sells plants in Home Depot and Lowe's, to grow better pollinator plants. So this is a place for people to see plants they love, garden styles they love, and to be educated, and for us to translate that into the wider world. So that's how Penn State will do it, right?
Yeah,
we will
makes sense.
Make the knowledge and translate it into ways people can really engage it. So it will save the pollinators if we put flowers on your agricultural farm, on the road margins, in your backyard, more and more better flowers.
Wonderful. So I barely have time for one more question, but I'm really curious, what's next? We're watching it grow and grow. What's next?
Well, as you know, we are in the middle of construction for the new Palmer Museum of Art facility in the Arboretum. And when that new building is open, it is going to be an amazing hub for both the arts and the sciences at Penn State. And I think it's going to be absolutely transformational for us at the Arboretum in terms of what we're able to do by way of education and programming. And all of us at the Arboretum are so excited to be in partnership with our colleagues at the Palmer and to see what the future holds there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I do think we're building a destination. It's going to attract people for so many different reasons. Thank you so much for your hard work. It is really, really appreciated. I'm going to visit constantly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Joined now again by Dr. Barron. Dr. Barron, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure.
On this topic of the Arboretum at Penn State, what prompted the university to invest in this 3-acre pollinator and bird garden? Why were you and other faculty members so compelled?
So, first of all, success follows success, right? The Arboretum was a vision. It begins. It has more and more people excited about it. 150,000 individuals, a connection to research, a significant connection to outreach, a valuable asset. And so why wouldn't you want to do the next part and the next part and the next part? But to tell you the truth, what makes that possible is philanthropy. We have individuals that are extraordinarily generous, and they want to see the Arboretum, a bird and pollinator garden, they want to see it grow, and they give their hard-earned treasure to Penn State for us to be successful. That enables us to do so much that we might not be able to do otherwise.
And it seems, this garden required quite a deal of community effort to come to fruition. How important is it for Penn State to, have these kind of involvements with community members?
I would say I'm willing to bet all those volunteers saved a lot of money in getting this job done. So that is great on the face of it. But I think the other thing about it is that people are voting with their feet. They're voting with their time and energy. I already said they're voting with their personal resources to make it successful. That strikes me as indicating to the university leadership that this is profoundly important to the community. The community is willing to pitch in to create this wonderful asset. And I said during the show that my wife and I like to wander through the Arboretum. It's very close to our house. When we go for walks, we always detour to go around the Arboretum. And it is just something that is a treasure at this point. So community members voting with their feet, with their time and energy, just tell you that it's really important to get this done and do it well.
And you mentioned you and your wife taking advantage of the Arboretum, but what do you hope everyday Penn State students will get out of the Pollinator and Bird Garden, considering, pretty recently opened?
So I probably would make a whole list. There's the students sitting there quietly, reading a physics book maybe. There are people that are sitting there just enjoying this open space and this feeling of being in a beautiful space for a period of time. There are people that probably daily walk through it. There are people that are sitting there looking at it as an exploration, knowing that there's a science to what's going on in attracting pollinators, and so that it becomes intellectually a lot of fun. And then there's the whole research component here of what this garden means to attracting, birds and pollinators and what their lives are like. So it's just, in my mind, it's a huge list.
Quite the comprehensive list. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. But Dr. Barron, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Good seeing you.
Yep, to you as well.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from
the Penn State Alumni Association, keeping alumni connected to the university and to each other. Membership information at alumni.psu.edu/belong.
and from viewers like you. Thank you.